Sure.
I've got something. Okay.
Okay. Stream is live.
Okay.
And are you going to record?
I'm not recording. I've got the button to record, so that's on you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Okay. I'm good to go. Dzień dobry to those of you here in Poland. Good evening to those of you who have joined us here in Australia, the US, and Canada. And shalom to you in Israel. And in fact, shalom to everybody right now, because I think we can use a bit of peace. My name is Estelle Roginski, and I'm co-vice president of the Australian Society of Polish Jews and their Descendants in Sydney, Australia. For those of you unfamiliar with our organisation, our statement of purpose is to preserve and promote the historical and cultural heritage of Jewish life in Poland and to foster understanding between current and future generations of the Polish and Jewish communities. This evening, we are delighted to be presenting KulturDocs, an online documentary series which explores the world of contemporary Jewish artists in Poland. Tonight, we are listening to an event entitled Art, Identity and Dialogue. Without further ado, I will pass you on to the director of this compelling series, Michael Rubenfeld, and the executive producer and co-director, Magda Rubenfeld. Take it away, guys.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. And if you're joining us from Poland, good morning. I'm going to start with a few slides to give you some context about who we are and what the series is about. So if you just give me a second to share my screen. So as Estelle said, and thank you very much for that lovely introduction, we are here to present to you a series, a web series called KulturDocs. But in order to explain the name and what it is and who we are, I invite you to watch these few slides. So we are a festival, the Jewish Arts and Activism Collective that was established in Krakow about 8 years ago. We started off as a small grassroots festival that really established in our very personal apartment that we just learned Estelle was actually at early on, and perhaps some of you as well. And gradually we evolved into a year-round organization that deals with other aspects of Jewish culture, namely advocacy and activism, Jewish heritage and memory, and contemporary Jewish art, which still remains one of the most important pillars of our activity. And this is where KulturDocs fits in. Festival early on wanted to bring in sort of marginalized voices and center them into the conversation in Poland. We started from this point of really needing a space and wanting to create a space for a more nuanced conversation about what it is to be like a contemporary Jew in Poland. And what it is, what are some of the complications, what are some of the questions that we're wrestling with, and what is the art that might sort of jump into those questions. And by trying to create a space for those voices that were often not heard, we realized that it's very important to bring in sort of voices that we might not be aware of. So we created a curatorial, or we adapted a curatorial process through an open call and an international jury that would select the projects rather than us always deciding what the content of festival was. And through the series of those submissions every year, where we're getting from 70 to 100 submissions from all over the world, we realized that there's actually a very incredibly rich world of contemporary Jewish arts that even us who are sort of in this business, we're not aware of. And through bringing in these artists and realizing that they don't always also know each other, we decided to establish a network of Polish Jewish artists called KulturLiga, which was established in December of 2023. The event was planned before. We were not, this was not in reaction to October 7th. However, it was a very important moment also for that reason, because this was the time that Jewish artists started to be sort of pushed out of their traditionally sort of the circles that they were traditionally part of, which were often left-wing progressive circles because of the situation in the Middle East. And so KulturLiga became also a very important space and community for them to get to know each other and to speak in safe space about the situation. The goal of KulturLiga was to initially also to promote the visibility of these Polish Jewish artists and their work. And what we found was really incredible quality of art. We were inspired to create the name by a historical organization called KulturLiga, which was active in the early 20th century across really Central Eastern Europe, and was active to support the creation of Yiddish art in all of its genres. So not one specific art discipline of art, but poetry, performance, prose, theater, music, etc. And so similarly, as KulturLiga, the historic KulturLiga wanted to promote the development of this art in Central Eastern Europe, so we wanted to do in Poland. This is the first such initiative in post-war Poland that gathers artists, Jewish artists based here. We have mapped already around 100 of those Jewish artists, and the network functions in regular meetings. We've already organized 3 of these meetings, and in the course of those meetings, over 40 artists already have joined the network. We have also a broad variety of disciplines represented: performers, theater artists, composers, musicians. Mostly these are artists who were born and raised in Poland, although we also have some artists that have come here to reconnect with their roots, both from sort of North America, Israel, Siberia, from different directions, America. We have artists who are very well established in their Jewish identities, who have grown up in Jewish schools, were educated at, for example, Bezalel Art Academy, and also artists who are very early in the steps of discovering their Jewish heritage and Jewish identity, really trying to even unpack what it means and whether they can call themselves Jewish, whether they can identify as Jewish. We have artists which are very well established on the Polish art scene, not necessarily as Jewish artists, some of the top Polish artists, in fact, as well as artists that are very early on in their careers. And also very broad range of artists spanning from artists in their 20s to artists in their 70s and 80s. We also have quite a broad spectrum of sort of ethnic backgrounds, including artists who are Sephardi, artists who are Ashkenazi artists. We have an artist who is a Jewish, Japanese, Polish artist, for example. And so KulturDocs, as the series of documentaries, emerged as an idea to really bring the stories of these artists to the broader world. And this is what you're about to experience a little bit or taste of today. And we're very fortunate that our partners in this endeavor is a really great international spread of artists, spread of organizations, including Ashkenaz Festival in Toronto, the ASPJ, Asylum Arts in New York, and Genocide and Holocaust Center in Cape Town, and Judiskrönika in Sweden. And now, without further ado, I'll pass on to Michael to present you the first film in the series.
Hello. Just give me half a second because I'm setting some stuff up. I saw that, Ezra. Ezra, I think the best thing to do will be, I'm not really sure what to do. So I think I'll what you can do is you can upload the stream after if so that it'll be up on there. A couple of technical difficulties. Hello, my name is Michael Rubenfeld. As Magda said, I'm the, oops, I just spotlit Magda instead of myself. My name is Michael Rubenfeld, and I'm the director of these 3 films. I'm also the co-director of Festival with Magda. And as Magda said, these films came out of an idea to be able to spotlight Polish Jewish artists. And when making the films, there was a decision that, well, there were a couple of decisions that I made. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share kind of little clips or trailers of the 3 films that I did end up making. But beforehand, I just wanted to talk about why I made the decisions to choose the artists that I did, and also the perspective that I did. So when I moved to Poland 9 years ago, I was really struck by how different the Polish Jewish contemporary reality was from the Canadian Jewish reality that I grew up in. I've spent a little bit of time in Australia, and my reality doesn't look so far away from, say, the reality in Australia, although I think Yiddish culture in Australia is richer and cooler, and I really like the Jewish reality in Australia. And what I understood in Poland was that for the majority of Jews, and this will come as no surprise to a lot of people, but it was a surprise for me, was that people, the Jewishness was lost for many people in Poland because of the war, and then because of communism. And it was only in this sort of post-communist world where a lot of people started rediscovering their Jewish identities. And in the process of rediscovery, needing to then understand what on earth it even meant to be Jewish, which were questions that I myself was never asking growing up in Canada, because I was just born into a Jewish family. And I went to a Jewish school. I never questioned my Jewishness. And when I started coming to Poland, these questions that Jews here were asking, I found became fascinating reflectors for me about my own Jewishness. I started to ask questions about my Jewishness in ways that I've never asked before, because of the artists who were asking questions about their own Jewishness. For many of the Jews in Poland, those questions were out of an essential need to understand what it meant to be Jewish, because they simply were not brought up in Jewish families necessarily, nor did they understand what it meant to be Jewish. For me, I never even knew that there were certain questions that I hadn't been asking. And it basically changed my life. And I've made the decision to move to Poland. Magda, who's also my wife, is a big part of the reason that I moved. But the other big part of the reason is because I found that the way that questions were being asked and Jewishness was being explored in Poland, and specifically by its artists, inspired me as an artist myself, to spend time focusing on my own personal Jewish identity politic in ways that I didn't even ever know I wanted to. And that involved starting festivals with Magda and several projects as well as these. As well as these 3 films. The exploration that I made the decision to do was generational. So I've got to focus on 3 different artists. The first artist that I will introduce is a man named Mikołaj Czaska, who some of you might have heard of. I'm going to show you a short trailer for the film. but it won't tell you as much as you might need to know about Mikołaj, which is that he's one of the most famous Jewish artists in Poland, and he's also an incredibly respected, very famous jazz and avant-garde musician in Poland. He was born before he was born during communism, and he was raised in a very specific environment where being Jewish was very unpopular. To discover that you were Jewish was a negative thing, something that you didn't necessarily want to discover. And I was really struck by how that ended up informing Mikołaj's practice as an artist. He's a brilliant musician. I'm going to show you a little bit of a trailer, and then there'll be some opportunities at the end of this for us to speak a bit more about the other artists if you have any questions or about this. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you this trailer for this first film. I might add that quite soon, all 3 films will be available to watch online. All right. Can everyone see? Okay, here we go. The best way to watch this might be in full screen. Growing up in Canada, I had been raised to be fearful of Poland because of what happened to my family and the Jews here during the Holocaust. But when I started visiting, I discovered how much work was being done in Poland on the topic of contemporary Jewish identity. As an artist myself, I've always looked to other artists as reflectors of contemporary society. And so I decided to spend time with some of Poland's Jewish artists to see how they were using art in relationship to their own Jewishness, in the hopes of understanding more about Jews in Poland. Mikołaj Czaska is one of Poland's most renowned musicians. He's considered an icon of Polish avant-garde jazz.
Jak ja się mam czuć, jak jestem młody chłopak i idę z tymi samymi chłopakami, które mi opowiadają ten dowcip o Żydach, i teraz ja jestem tym właśnie. Co to za przyjemność? Co robisz w takim momencie? Zapominasz.
Dla mnie on od początku był zawsze inny. On grał inaczej, on miał swój świat. On miał zawsze swój folklor, on miał swoją tradycję, która dla mnie jest właściwie esencją tego, kim my jesteśmy rzeczywiście w Europie Wschodniej.
Yeah, from the very beginning I really had a feeling that I would like to be a part of the family. That I really would like to be from somewhere.
You can laugh when you're saying trauma. Say that, trauma. You know, I would like to be happy, for sure.
That was the first film, first trailer. Magda said there was a bit of weird noise. I hope it was okay for you, more or less. I had a really nice time with Mikołaj, and we had an interesting journey. Mikołaj lives in Gdansk, and Mikołaj has been doing a project where he's been going to former synagogues or former spaces that were once Jewish spaces, active Jewish spaces, and he was making music and in some cases recording albums. And Mikołaj went to a town called Słupsk, which is near Gdansk, where he lives, and he recorded an album in a former Jewish burial house. And we decided to go and spend some time in Słupsk on the very same day that there was a very important anniversary of a deportation of the Jews of Słupsk to Auschwitz. It was I think, I forgot which number, 75th anniversary or 80th or 90th anniversary. And those Jews were gathered in a local gymnasium at a local high school, where they remained for several days before they were taken to the trains and to Auschwitz. And it's still a functioning, active school. And so Mikołaj played a concert in that very gymnasium on the anniversary of that deportation, and that is the journey that you see us go on, or you see us go on in that first film. So I think I'll move on to Betty. Does that make sense? So the second artist, and Mikołaj is in his, I think, early 60s now, or late 50s. The second artist that I wanted to focus on was a woman named Betty Q, which is her stage name. Her actual name is Anna Czyżewska, but she likes to go by Betty Q. Betty is a burlesque artist. And she's very interesting. Betty is in her late 30s. So she's of the next generation of Jewish artists. And we at festivals have known Betty for quite a while. We've collaborated with her several times. Actually, just before we started, we had a conversation with Estelle, because she actually saw Betty perform, do a kind of club show performance in our flat in Krakow, which is where we used to do our performances, the majority of our festival. And Betty's a very special artist because she's considered one of the grand dames. She's kind of the grand dame of Polish burlesque, because many people believe that burlesque would not necessarily exist in the context of Poland without her. She was one of the first people to bring burlesque to Poland, which has now become quite popular. There are even burlesque clubs. She herself had opened a burlesque club. And this is quite interesting. The other thing that's very interesting about Betty is that her practice is also very kind of closely associated with her activist leanings. So I would call Betty a feminist and someone who really has fought for the rights of women and the way that the body is perceived within Polish context. Poland is quite fascinating because it's a very Catholic country, as many of you probably know, and the influence that Catholic ideology has on our relationship to sexuality and the body is very much something that Betty is intersecting with and working with, and part of the reason that she even moved towards her practice, moving away from shame within the context of body, moving away from this idea that sexuality or the body is something that needs to be kind of always covered, and this is sort of very Catholic. Before Betty found burlesque, she was a theater artist and dancer, a belly dancer. And interestingly, when she discovered Jewishness, she became incredibly engaged and active in the Jewish community. She very much fought for Jewish community, for Jewish voices, and also for young Jewish voices, and often for young female Jewish voices. Betty's still very much engaged in Jewish community, but when we first met Betty when we first invited Betty to be a part of festival, she, her response was, "But the work that I make isn't particularly Jewish," and we completely disagreed with her. Because although it's not overtly Jewish, I find Betty's practice very, very Jewish. The fact that she's as much of an activist as she is, I think the way that she's trying to sort of even like have people recontemplate sexuality, but also what I discovered working with Betty on this film was that Betty, like Mikołaj, was not born knowing that she was Jewish, and in fact had a very complicated story. Her mother's story about having to kind of abandon Jewishness was in a way a kind of burden, both a burden and an influence on Betty's activist practice. And in many ways, she ends up fighting and trying to give voice to the voiceless. And I discovered that in a way she was embodying her own matriarchal, her own matriarchal, the matriarchal burdens of her ancestors, and in a way trying to almost give them justice through her practice. To me, this felt very Jewish, and I was very inspired by it, and I continue to find her very inspiring. And I'm going to now show you the trailer for Betty before we move on to the third trailer. If anyone has any questions, note them, and we'll get to questions, I think, shortly. Here we go. Everyone can see this? All good? Okay.
Growing up in Canada, I had been raised to be fearful of Poland because of what happened to my family and the Jews here during the Holocaust. But when I started visiting, I discovered how much work was being done in Poland on the topic of contemporary Jewish identity.
This is me.
And so I decided to spend time with some of Poland's Jewish artists to see how they were using art in relationship to their own Jewishness, in the hopes of understanding more about Jews in Poland.
And I'm feeling good.
Collected a couple of girls to do some projects together to start the burlesque in the country.
Ta burleska jest totalnie polityczna.
Nigdy nie było to dla mnie o religii, ale właśnie o tym byciu razem i jakimś celebrowaniu tego, że wciąż jesteśmy na ziemi.
This alter ego is also to make me safe from the whole world. It's a kind of escapism. Yeah, I wanted to be pretty. I wanted to be special. I wanted to be free.
W którymś momencie uczyłam moją mamę o tym, jak wygląda to żydowskie życie.
Niech będzie błogosławione światło, symbol dobra na świecie.
Okay, that was Betty Q. The third film that I made was focusing on two artists, Marcela Poroshenko, sometimes Shabowska, but she likes to go by Poroshenko now, and Ezra Vojakovsky. Ezra and Marcela are two young artists. They are in their early 20s. They are both students at contemporary art school in Szczecin, Poland. And they are both also identify as queer and as trans. Marcela is a video artist and Ezra is a visual artist. And we wanted to look at them partly because I was very struck by this journey from Mikołaj Czaska's reality, being born and discovering his Jewishness in the 60s or the 70s in Poland, 70s and 80s in Poland, to a far more contemporary Poland, and this evolution of a place where it was not okay to discover one's Jewishness, and certainly not queerness, and absolutely not transness, to this contemporary version of Poland, which is often viewed as a place that is closed to LGBTQ plus communities. And while certainly it's more closed in Poland than my experience in say Canada or the experience in Australia, I was also struck at the fact that you can be young, Jewish, queer, and trans in contemporary Poland, and you can find your world and make interesting art from those places. And these are two very young, interesting, fascinating artists, very different kinds of artists. And then the other thing with Marcela and Ezra was that Ezra, like Nikolai and Betty, was not born knowing that he was Jewish. He discovered it. And he does still struggle with understanding what it means to be a Jew and how much he is or is not allowed to step into his Jewish identity. Come in. Sorry, I'm in the middle of something. Sorry. Sorry, I'm just at a theater and someone's dropping off some sheets. And then Marcela, unlike the other three artists, was born Jewish. She was born Jewish into a Jewish family, raised knowing that she was Jewish. And I was also very struck at just how different her investigation as a Jew was. So you're not going to necessarily see too much of it. I'm going to show a clip of the film in a second. But what was so interesting about my experience of the two of them and what I tried to focus on in the film was that Marcela, Betty, and Mikołaj often talked about this question of what it means to be Jewish, or their focus was on trying to rediscover their Jewish or work with the trauma of Jewish loss in their families, which were all very beautiful, wonderful explorations and journeys. Whereas it was interesting to see Marcela basically kind of wanting to, not only wanting to, but being at the center of being very generative in terms of defining what contemporary Jewish identity is, what contemporary queer Jewish identity is, and what the future of the Jewish reality in Poland is. Mostly, in my opinion, because she's not negotiating the trauma of not understanding what Jewishness is for her. And so it was really great to be able to have that differentiation in this group, and you can really feel it in the way that she talks about her Jewishness. I'm going to show you a short clip from that film. I just have to find it. No, I don't have it open for some reason. Back. Here we go. Sorry, just setting it up. Queuing it up. Got it. Okay, here we go. The sound might be a little quiet, so you might have to turn it up on your end because we haven't fixed the sound fully. This is a very fresh, very few people have experienced this film at all. So this is a real sneak preview. Here we go.
Meet other people.
My teacher, Karina Bleguła, told me about an actual Jewish event in Szczecin. And Ezra was there, and we were introduced to each other, saying hi. And yeah, that's how it began. We then started this queer study group together, and yeah, we just started working together.
Przede wszystkim nie postrzegam transpłciowości jako aktu negatywnego, wymazywania swojej dotychczasowej historii. Wręcz przeciwnie, postrzegam jako po prostu kolejną warstwę, kolejną epokę. Stąd w moim imieniu nie chciałam odejmować od niego liter, tylko dodawać. Stąd Marcella.
I know they have a lot in common, and I didn't know they remember that it was me that had them meet first. But I've been remembering, and I observe this friendship, and it makes me very happy because I think that we all need people who understand us, and we need to be more powerful, to have more strength. We need to be surrounded by people who will understand what we mean and understand our feelings and understand our situation. So it's very important, and they have so much in common.
Being a vocal minority in Poland in itself, like proclaiming I am this, you know, even this is an act of resistance. The amount of like banal anti-Semitism that you encounter is quite common. Not necessarily directed at you as a Jewish person, but rather, you know, it being on a wall, in the media, you know, the replication of especially of like ethnic stereotypes is quite common. I enjoy making Jewish art. Jewish art defined here as art done by Jews, about Jews, or about stuff Jewish. I want to do art about Jewish life. It's a triumph of Ezra over the city. Based on Ezra's paintings, it's a cascade of details of Ezra's route to Bargab, where Ezra can be seen like triumphantly, quote unquote, surfing the wave of the city. Like, you know, Ezra is part of it, and
I think it's interesting that you chose to include the details from the bitten finger painting. It's kind of funny how so much art came out of being beaten up.
Marcella, as an artist, she's been constantly writing a diary through her artworks of her own change, but also that would, for us, the viewers, be the context that will help us see a bigger map of the social changes and personal changes. Ezra, he's interested in the very same issues, having loads of knowledge and engagement in his practice, which I consider incredible. With Ezra, every discussion, every conversation seems to demand care.
Przepraszam, że ci rysuję w taki sposób. Nie umiem inaczej.
To jest piękne.
I don't think you can characterize a friendship, you know, by a...
Thank you. That was the third film. So I am going to say thank you very much and welcome Magda and maybe Estelle back, where we can continue the conversation and hopefully it also include you all. Thank you very much.
Hi, so I might kick up with, I've got a couple of gnawing questions for me. I am mindful that the artists you've selected are struggling on multiple levels and also operate on the fringe. They would be fringe here in Australia as well. It's sort of, and I think things are more poignant in Poland because people are discovering their roots, discovering their identity, which is really the topic of what you're investigating. And please let me know if these are not appropriate questions, but I wonder how and if there's been an impact of the change of government in Poland, whether that's made a difference to the artists and how more forthcoming they are with their identities as a consequence? That would be my first question.
I mean, from a government perspective, undoubtedly, without question, yes, the previous government's rhetoric around LGBTQ realities, and the current president, who's who's about to end his term, has been, in my opinion, as a Canadian, absolutely scandalous and atrocious. So to have a government be actively against what they call LGBTQ ideologies, no longer in power, whereas people who are currently in power are far more open and working towards at least civil partnerships, more rights for people who identify as queer. It's night and day. So from that perspective, absolutely. Maybe Magda can speak towards other perspectives as well.
I mean, I agree with that. And at the same time, the changes, I think, started even before this new government, and perhaps even were somehow the reasons why this government now was elected, because we actually hosted Ezra's project at our festival 2 years ago, and a conversation with her. And Marcela said that basically, since the protests and the civil society started to stand up against the oppressive politics of this law and justice government, it became sort of more normalized that young people were identifying differently, that they were happily more welcome to identify in a way that they wanted and in a way that they pleased. And so, as a kind of result of a pushback to this politics, a certain climate changed, at least in university settings. This is certainly not true for countryside and sort of smaller towns, but the sort of wave of change had begun. And I think this is sort of what also partly lifted this government and this sort of incredible resistance. And voter turnout, we had a 75% voter turnout in Poland that changed the government. So it was a very, very big kind of social effort to do that. Although, of course, the struggle hasn't started. It's still far from perfect, but at least it's improving.
So now that brings me to the next question, because I imagine there's been shifts again, because there certainly have been in Australia. The impact of the 7th of October. What has happened to your artists since the 7th of October? Has there been change?
Definitely. Do you want to say something, Michael, first?
No, go ahead. I think that you probably can speak more informed.
I mean, probably similarly, actually, in preparation for this talkback, we understood with Ezra May that there are some similarities between Poland and Australia in that there is definitely a proven rise of anti-Semitism. We have statistics that, like, in online anti-Semitism has risen by 800%. And there's a lot of hate speech and a lot of sort of permission for verbal anti-Semitism. At the same time, it hasn't really escalated beyond that in the same way that it has in Western Europe. We've not had the same security threats or while there have been let's say spraying paints on cemeteries and heritage sites. There was a flaming bottle thrown at the Nożek synagogue in Warsaw. Nobody was hurt. So there is an escalation that's evident, but things are not as bad as they are in some other Western countries. At the same time, in Poland, we've traditionally sort of, until 2 years ago, our biggest problem at Festival was also always traditional anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism focused really or derived from religion, from right-wing extremism. Meanwhile, right now, the left has been also increasingly problematic and very anti-Zionist and anti-Israeli, and often lumping Israel with all Jews everywhere. And that's translated also to lives and livelihood of other Jewish artists, some of whom are being disinvited from shows because they, for example, are dealing with stories of resistance of women, of Jewish women during the war, and that's being sort of almost put on the same level as IDF soldiers. Therefore, they're not being invited to do showings, which is where I think KulturLiga has been it became more important than we had realized, in a sense, when we initially established it, because it really is a space that creates more opportunities for Jewish artists. We've been able to do a collective exhibition at the Polin Jewish Museum, which is a huge museum where thousands of people could see the work of those artists. We're making films like this, which, you know, is supported by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's also the first time since like 8 years that we're getting public funding from the government, again, as a Jewish organization. So that's also partly an answer to your question. So I think that KulturLiga is sort of an important resistance piece to this situation, and we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to understand where to position ourselves, because we're facing another election, which will help elect the new president of Poland. And on one hand, that is very sort of it's looking optimistic. It's looking like we're going to have a progressive thinking president. On the other hand, there's a question in our minds about what does that mean for the relationship of this government with the Jewish community, and where everything will sort of end up positioning itself as this conflict in the Middle East continues. And those are questions I don't have answers for yet.
The other thing I might add that I find is actually pretty interesting is I'm having a lot of conversations with people, not just artists, but artists and more, who are going, hey, like my version of Jewishness, because all Jews are being, you know, there's this assumption that all Jews' versions of their Jewishness is in direct relationship to Israel. And no matter one's politics about what's happening in Israel, a lot of people are going, hey, you know, like, actually, like my version of Jewishness is actually unique to myself and unique to this place. And so what we're discovering is people going like, we need to do a better job telling our Jewish story, because, you know, as we all know, Israel has done an incredible job telling its story. Whereas, I mean, they tell their story a lot over and over again. And so, you know, I'm finding people going, all right, I really I want to focus our energy on the contemporary Polish Jewish narrative, you know, that might have a bit of Israel within it, but it's really not about Israel. Jews born in Poland, raised in Poland, who want to sort of focus on their Polishness, where often there's been a lot of push, particularly by some Jewish organizations, to really, you know, create Jewish identities that are very, very closely linked to Israel. And not everybody necessarily wants that. And then there are certain artists like very famous artists like Jesse Eisenberg and Darren Aronofsky, who's a very famous director, who both recently decided to reclaim their Polish citizenships and become Polish citizens, partly, I think, in response to that identity, the politic question, which I think for me is very much a response to October 7th. It's not necessarily as much about politics, but I think for a lot of Jews, a lot of Jews in the world are so, you know, there's just a lot of assumptions about the Jews of the world, that Jews who are not necessarily living in Israel don't necessarily.
That's true. I mean, I just, one of the things that rang most true to me was one of Shai Davidai's observations, and that's that we as Jews are excluded, in a sense, from the civil rights movement. And, you know, you don't see any sort of flashpoint anywhere else in the world where those nationalities are excluded in other countries when there's a migration, whereas we are held responsible for Israel and for Zionism or for any other idea. But I feel, and this is me personally, I feel very strongly that I live in Australia as an Australian Jew, and I do feel that I contribute to the environment here, and I do feel I have rights as a human being. And my view on Israel sort of is my personal view, and it's apart from me, it's separate from me being here as a citizen of this country where I contribute. And I think that's possibly true for a lot of Jews everywhere, that we feel our strong connection, but we also have a right to civil rights, you know, and that's a lot of your artists also I see that in a lot of people's works. I mean, sorry, I should have asked a question, not made a statement.
No, it's great. It's great.
But that is an issue. The civil rights question is an issue.
We're happy to also learn more about the situation in Australia, and I think for us these projects are also an opportunity for a conversation. So we're happy for you or anyone in the audience to make statements as well as ask questions.
Yeah, I think there's just a few minutes left. So I actually wonder if there's anyone in the audience who might have any questions that they want to answer. Maybe if they do, they should just maybe I would recommend they turn their microphone or they turn their cameras on.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question. So my name is Eva. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Eva. Cześć, Stelka. Cześć. So I live in. We emigrated from Poland in 1958 when I was 7. And my question really, and we emigrated because of anti-Semitism. My question to both of you is, maybe I missed something by being late, and my apologies. How comfortable is it? How easy is it to be to identify as Jewish in Poland? Is Magda, you mentioned the traditional anti-Semitism. Is that pretty well universal? That's the impression my parents give me, that actually was universal. And my father's Jewish. My mother was brought up Catholic, but the suspicion is that actually her background was Jewish, but that can't be proven exactly. Anyhow, but she's the one that said, no, she couldn't imagine staying, because wherever she heard conversations already in 58, they were anti-Semitic. How comfortable is it to be, or is it a constant confrontation with the issue? Is it, if you're not, I know, and Michael, I take my hat off repeatedly to your courage to do what you're doing in your, what is it? I'm a Lucky Jew. That whole project was stunning for me, really stunning. I thought, wow, what a way to approach this issue. Wow. So I'm just wondering, is it a constant meeting with that, at that interface with people, wherever you are?
Well, I mean, it really depends. I mean, I sort of moved to Poland in a way to become a professional Jew. And so much of my practice revolves around my Jewishness in a very public way. So people are encountering my Jewishness constantly. I have a YouTube channel, it's about 5,000 subscribers now, and a TikTok channel. I'm constantly putting my Jewishness out there, so people really know me as a Jew here. And it wasn't my reality before moving here. It was a decision. It was a kind of artistic decision that I made moving here. But I think part of the reason I do it is because, yeah, I do feel like I was surprised by how comfortable I felt and how much philo-Semitism there was, even, which is the opposite of anti-Semitism, rooted in anti-Semitism, but more strange and bizarre than ever dangerous. Now, I'm also the kind of person that really strives off of feeling uncomfortable. And my art practice often revolves around stepping into uncomfortable situations and finding artistic opportunities. So for me, Poland is like a gold mine, you know. I really love it.
Because
Well, just because there's just so much, there's so much undiscovered. Well, part of it is discomfort, but it's not like it's discomfort more connected to maybe like a kind of naivete around what Jewishness is. Within cities, my experience is that, you know, Poland's incredibly progressive with a lot of very progressive people. And of course, I live within progressive bubbles, and the conversation is very rich and deep, and people are very curious. And I don't find Polish people to be uniquely anti-Semitic. There's a homogeneity in Poland, and Catholicism has a lot of control around people's relationship to difference in general. But you know, this is not 1958 Poland. This is not 1968 Poland. This is not 1980 Poland or 1990 Poland. This is, you know, Poland in 2024. It's a part of a global society. The flow of information, education, you know, it doesn't live, it's a bit of a bubble. But in terms of like, I feel safer in Poland right now than I do, you know, than I do in like Canada. I don't feel like right now as a result of what's happening in Israel. So no, my experience of Poland is that the anti-Semitism or the discomfort I feel is around relationships to Jewishness that I find very stupid sometimes, or ignorant or naive. But I find that for the most people, you know, most people have good intentions. Most people, in my experience, have good intentions around Jews. And it's important that for them that Jews understand that they have good intentions. And I think that a lot of people feel like Poland's gotten too bum of a rap because of its history, and also the control of the Russian controlled communist Polish government that your family lived under. But I think Poland's become a very different place than what I thought it was. And I think it's continuing to progress. That's my experience.
Well, that's exciting. It's a pleasure to hear, because a part of me has a longing to revisit and connect. I went there as a student when I was 25 to Krakow, and actually joined the theater. The theater was Krikot 2 with Tadeusz Kantor.
You were working with Kantor? Wow, that's amazing.
Well, I'm a doctor, so I originally went as a medical student to Prokocim, but the conditions were so appalling at many levels at that time that I ran away. And my father's brother used to be the advisor to the minister on affairs of culture in Poland until he was thrown out in 1968. Anyhow, so through him I was introduced to Kantor and stayed in Kantor's place, and then Jonas Stern, painter with whom I ultimately lived, and experienced daily rehearsals of The Dead Class.
Wow.
It was amazing. I've never seen theatre like it. Never have seen theatre that matches that quality visually, emotionally. It was totally life-changing. So the experience was phenomenal. And anti-Semitism didn't arise for me because I was surrounded by Jews. The whole group that were running the theatre were Jews, old Jews in their 70s, but Jews nevertheless, and they were very exciting people. But the stories from my parents are scary, and I think, I have a longing to go back, and I'm also a visual artist as well as
oh gosh, yeah. I think a lot of people's stories from their parents have scared parents and grandparents. They've scared subsequent generations. But I think that once people realize that once they come, this was certainly my experience. It was my father's experience too. That once they came to Poland, they were like, "Oh, right, like things change." This place is very different, and not only is it different, it's very special. It's a very special Jewish place. I have to get going in a second, and I see that Eva's got her hand up, and so
can you hear me? I don't know. It's the audio is on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Two things very quickly. I also came here in 1958. And my mother was in theater in Poland. She was Catholic. My father was Jewish. and all our friends were mixtures of Catholic, I hate to say Polish and Jewish, Catholic and Jewish, and it didn't matter. So in a way, I was brought up in a bubble. And so many really witty, clever Polish satirists and actors and writers were Jewish, after the war. And I've been going back to Poland. My next trip will be my 15th trip. And the theaters in Poland are so unbelievably advanced and progressive. From Wyspiański Theater in Zakopane to different ones in Warsaw. So I'm very much interested in art. And I was wondering, is it possible to get in touch with you when I'm in Warsaw again in August?
Of course.
What would be the best way to get
I put our email in the chat. I think it's the safest way to reach out to us, because either one of us checks it or our staff. The summer is always tricky because we run our festival at the end of June, and then we sort of tend to just deflate and try to travel or do other things. So we're unsure yet if we'll be there. But if you let us know ahead of time, kind of closer to June, I guess we'll know. And by all means, if any of you are in Poland, please do reach out to us. I think,
which is your email. Whereabouts is it?
info@festival.com. I'll put it in the
It's
chat
in the
again.
chat. If you go at the bottom of your screen.
At
You got it?
Festival, VALT.
Yes, that's the one.
Yes.
Perfect.
Festival. Oh, is that, sorry, I came late. Is that the Jewish festival?
Go ahead, Michael. I'll wrap up here.
To actually start rehearsals for a show. I'm in a theater about to start rehearsals. So I'm going to go. Magda will stay and answer some more questions.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Bye.
Lovely to meet you.
We are actually over the hour. So if you've got a question, please feel free to ask it now quickly. I think we will make it a wrap. And you have an invitation from Magda to make contact by email. I think this has been, for me particularly, and I'm sure for everybody in the audience, an exceptional session, and one which I'd like to extend in discussion and perhaps start linking some artists here in Australia with you to broaden your Kulturliga and see whether we can stitch ourselves into you and you so that there can be a cross-fertilization. So thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for giving us your time and energy. And I'll close if nobody else has any other questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it would be wonderful to connect with Australian artists, and we've had Australian artists also come to us through the open call, so that's always a good way to connect. But also personally, you can write us, you can find us on Facebook. If you have any questions now or later, we're very always happy to connect.
Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Lovely to meet you, Magda, as well.
Yeah, lovely to meet you. And I can just kind of finish with giving you one example, sort of in response to the first Eva. I'm traveling right after this meeting to Radom today, where I've been invited to give a presentation on like a custom of Christian carolers who would come from, like in the 19th century already, go from house to house dressed up as in different outfits. And one of the figures that they were dressing up as was a Jewish outfit, which at the time when this custom was created sort of made sense because they were just portraying their neighbors. But as the custom continues today, it's become a bit awkward. But of course, these artifacts exist in ethnographic museums and they show up here and then for around Christmas. But what's starting to change is that people and institutions are becoming more and more aware of their cultural complications. So instead of just showing them without any context and commentary, I've been invited today to talk about how some of these representations are problematic and how they solidify stereotypes of not just Jews, but also Roma. people. So there's a sense of, I guess, increasing awareness and a need for a conversation, which on one hand is uncomfortable because we're having to like unpack anti-Semitic stereotypes, but at the same time, rather than them being hidden or showing without context, we're invited to come and comment and to encounter people and to teach them, which I think is great, which I think is the best way to overcome some of these stereotypes. So I think Poland is endlessly complicated and endlessly fascinating, and you're sort of always, it's always a bit bittersweet. But if you're ready for that, I highly encourage you to come.
Wonderful to thank you. Encouraging.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and good night and good day.
Good night.
Dobranoc, do widzenia.
Dobranoc, do zobaczenia, mam nadzieję.
Do zobaczenia, bardzo dziękuję.
Dziękujemy.
Dziękuję bardzo. Do widzenia.
Dziękujemy, do widzenia.